Good afternoon, dear colleagues and friends. We are now opening the panel session of the Dissertation Board for the defense of the thesis by Mamedov. The specialization is History of International Relations and Foreign Policy. The topic is Negotiation Process on the Cyprus Problem. By the order of St. Petersburg State University as of the 1st of April 2019, number 2911/1, I, Professor Irina Zeleva, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Associate Professor of St. Petersburg State University, was appointed head of the Dissertation Board. Now allow me to introduce my colleagues, members of the Dissertation Board. Yuri Akimov, Doctor of Historical Science, SPBU Professor. Professor Ruslan Kostyuk, Doctor of Historical Sciences, SPBU Professor. Ramil Valeyev, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor of Kazan Federal University. And remotely, we have Professor Suhnaz Aymas, PhD in Political Science, Professor of Koç University, Turkey. First off, I'd like to underscore that under the Federal Law number 127, as of the 23rd of August 2016, on the Federal Law on Science and State Scientific and Technical Policy, St. Petersburg University is entitled to confer its own academic degrees. The corresponding order on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University was issued on the 1st of September 2016, and that's the basis of our today's session. According to this order, the panel discussion is valid, providing 2/3 of the appointed board members are present. The total number is not to be fewer than 4 people. Today, the Dissertation Board consists of 5 people. All of them are present, including 1 member present remotely, who is working with us today via Skype. Therefore, we have a quorum. Now, let me give an overview of the agenda. The panel discussion cannot exceed 2 hours. The first item, the chairman's presentation of the documents submitted by the candidate. Chairman's reply to questions, if any, 5 minutes. Number 2, the candidate's presentation providing an overview and findings of the research, from 15 to 20 minutes. Number 3, questions to the candidate regarding the presentation, no more than 2 minutes for each question. The candidate's replies to questions, if any. We haven't received any external reviews. Number 5, reports on the status from the members of the board. Members of the board are requested to provide critical remarks and questions, no more than 10 minutes per person. Number 6, the chair's report on the status. Number 7, the candidate's comments about the reports on the status, no more than 15 minutes. Item 8, questions from the audience. The floor will be given to the non-board attendees. They can give a brief account of their ideas and or ask questions to the candidate about the research only, no more than 5 minutes per person. We kindly ask you to fill in the registration form and give your full name before the talk. Item 9, the candidate's comments about the talks given by non-members of the board, no more than 5 minutes. Number 10, presentation of the candidate's thesis supervisor, no more than 3 minutes. Item 11, a 5-minute break before the open balloting on conferring or non-conferring the academic degree. The discussion of the results of the defense is not broadcast. Item 12, open balloting, vote counting and recording the results in the minutes of today's session. Item 13, deciding upon conferring or not conferring the SPBU academic degree. And finally, candidate's closing speech, no more than 2 minutes. Before we proceed with the agenda, I kindly ask you to switch off your mobile phones. The panel session of the Dissertation Board is being recorded and broadcast on the internet and interpreted into English and into Russian. So let me start with the first item on the agenda. That's an overview of the documents submitted by the candidates. That is by Mamedov Koshkar-ogly was submitted in conformity with the requirements for the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences. The topic is negotiation process on the Cyprus problem. The specialization is history of international relations and foreign policy. The thesis was approved for defense by the order of the SPBO academic secretary as of the 12th of March 2019. The dissertation board was set up by the order of the SPBO academic secretary as of the 1st of April 2019. And I have already introduced the members of the dissertation board to you, dear colleagues. The candidate has submitted the following documents to the SPBO academic secretary. Number 1, an application to Professor Nikolai Kropotchev, rector of St. Petersburg University, on the approval of the thesis for defense. Number 2, a report of the thesis supervisor, Niyaz Sabirovich Niyazov, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Associate Professor. Item 3, list of published works containing 4 items, which describe the research findings. All of them are published in peer-reviewed journals recommended by the Ministry of Education and Science of the Russian Federation. Number 4, letter of verification issued by St. Petersburg University that certifies that Mamedov Koshkar-ogly was enrolled on a full-time postgraduate program from the 1st of October 2011 to the 30th of September 2014. Specialization, the history of international relations and foreign politics. He has passed 3 qualifying exams in the main field of study, history and philosophy of science and the foreign language, getting the highest score. Document 5. Expert statement from St. Petersburg University on submitting the thesis for defense approved by Sergei Aplonov, SPB Vice Rector for Research. Item 6, Master's Diploma number 7. A document stated that the candidate has not received a higher education in any other country of the world. And finally, a thesis in Russian and English, a printed version with the manuscript copyright and digital copy. The thesis formatting and reference list comply with local regulations. The above-mentioned documents comply with Item 12 of Section 3 of the Order on Granting Academic Degrees in St. Petersburg University. Now let's give the floor to the candidate. Let me remind you that you only have 15 minutes. Good afternoon, distinguished chair, distinguished members of the dissertation board and attendees. I'd like to present my thesis, negotiation process on the Cyprus problem. The topic is relevant for a few reasons. It's a conflict of several interests of European and global leaders, regional leaders as well, and such global powers as the USA, Great Britain and Russia. The problem is still acute, and some of the actors of international relations I have mentioned cannot receive significant dividends from their economic activity. UN has a great influence on it, and due to the joint efforts of all these actors, the conflict could have been settled long ago. Russia and other countries have to be really gentle and delicate with the policy they conduct in this area. Cyprus is viewed by many as the ally of Russia in its arguments with European countries, the US and the world at large. Hence, the research in the history of negotiations is really relevant because it's a perfect example of a negotiation, of a difficult and complex negotiation process that might act as a model for negotiations of other countries in future. Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots have a different approach to the conflict. Their communities work together to eliminate the conflict, along with the UN efforts and efforts of other international actors. The purpose of my study was to reveal the peculiarities of the dynamics of the negotiation process related to the Cyprus settlement since the transition of the conflict from the latent stage to the form of an open armed confrontation until the last attempt to resolve the confrontation under the UN auspices in 2017. I focus on the period from 1992 to 2017. Why did I choose the year 1992? That's because of the new conditions that were formed after the bipolar system of international relations collapsed. The year 2017 is due to the collapse of negotiations of Tramontana that year. What is the novelty of my study? The study is the first Russian attempt to focus on the negotiations since the year 1992 to the year 27, so that's a new time frame. I show how political, ideological, military and economic factors drew the conflict from its latent stage to an open military confrontation. I also focused how different international organizations made their contribution into the conflict and its resolution. I showed how the Annan Plan affected the conflict and led to the transformation of political elites. The major stumbling block was that both parties involved wanted to implement their unrealistic dreams. Now I'd like to focus on my research findings submitted for defense. Number one, antagonism in the Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot views on the future of the island was not formed as a consequence of the mythical perception of the past of its ethnic group. It is also due to the civil war that was on Cyprus back in the 1940s. Research finding number two, the Zurich-London agreements were the form of the greatest compromise between all the actors involved in the Cyprus problem, which gave a real chance for the successful implementation in the future. Research finding number three, the idea of enosis in 1940-1974 became a factor destroying the Cypriot sovereignty. Finding number four, the negotiation process on the Cyprus settlement in 1984 to 1991 was held with the increasing participation of the UN Secretary General Peres de Salar. The European Union was gaining more and more prominence on the international arena in those years. And the inclusion of Cyprus into the European Union, as they thought, could positively affect the negotiation process. It could also affect the transformation of Greek Cypriots to transform their mind. They were supposed to accept the idea of a Federation Cyprus. Starting from the 2011, the main factor affecting the negotiation is the economic factor. Finding six, the attempt to resolve the Cyprus problem within the framework of the Annan Plan, as well as the no expressed by the Greek Cypriots in the referendum on the adoption of the said document, with the yes said by the Turkish Cypriots, had far-reaching consequences. Number seven, let's get back to the economic factors. It mostly concerns the hydrocarbon market and the reserves of oil and gas that were found in the sea surrounding the island. My final research finding, the collapse of the negotiations in the summer of 2017 contributed to the position of the Cypriot authorities demanding not only the withdrawal of Turkish troops, but also the elimination of the guarantee system. This is it for my presentation. Now you are welcome with your questions to the candidate, if any. Are there any questions from the members of the dissertation board? I do not seem to have any questions now. All my questions can be found in my reports on the thesis. If members of the board do not have any questions, let's now turn to the reports of the members of the dissertation board. All the reports on the thesis were duly posted on the SPBU official website. We haven't received any external reviews. Reports on the thesis will now be read, and now the floor is given to Yuri Akimov, Doctor of Historical Sciences, SPBU Professor. Distinguished Chair, distinguished members of the board and attendees. The thesis by Mamedov focuses on the topic whose relevance is beyond doubt. The Cyprus conflict is a long-lasting conflict. It's one of the most continuous conflicts in modern history. However, in its middle term, there is a prospect for successful resolution. Why is it difficult to study the conflict? Because here we deal with the intersection of interests of actors of different levels and kinds. The USSR and then Russia, the United States, European Union, and many regional actors as well. The attempts to resolve the conflict showed both positive and negative sides of the peacemaking efforts. There is an abundance of literature on this topic developed in different countries. I should note that the behavior of Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots, including common people and political leaders, is not often in the light, in the focus of research. And it's only logical that our candidate decided to focus on the activity of these two communities and the efforts they take to resolve the conflict. He also analyzed the UN peacemaking activities as well as the engagement of other international organizations. He focuses on a set of external and internal factors which directly or indirectly affect the negotiation process, previously and today. I will not speak at length on the structure of the thesis and its time frame, because you can find that in my report. The literature review is ample and sufficient. The candidate shows good knowledge of all the relevant publications on this topic. I'd like to focus on the advantages of this thesis. He was convincing enough to show how at the outset of the conflict there was not a common vision of the US and other actors on this issue. That's page 26. Between the year 2005 to current period, the negotiation process has been largely affecting both communities living on the Cyprus. All the leaders of Cyprus who were trying to make living conditions comfortable for both communities unfortunately failed. Both communities had really high expectations of each other, which in many cases resulted in the failure of the negotiation process. It's interesting to note that the Soviet position was rather pro-Greek than pro-Turkish, mostly because of the activity of the black colonels. The research gives an idea that it's impossible to resolve the conflict in the short term unless there are mutual concessions, and the conflict may only resolve on a step-to-step basis. The candidate reveals himself as a well-seasoned researcher and a scientist, professional scientist. It's a basic research, and the research findings are convincing and well substantiated. The research is a contribution into those aspects of the issue that so far have been little studied. The research is of both practical and theoretical value. As for my critical remarks, I mostly give them as a ground for debate. Most my remarks will only require clarification on behalf of the candidate. I think the candidate exaggerates the impact of Great Britain to facilitate security on the island. The candidate doesn't focus enough on the role of Turkey to equip these forces and to allocate these forces with money, provisions, and so on. Active cooperation of the US and USSR at the end of Cold War resulted in more effective UN peacemaking efforts. The US was a more influential player at this time, unlike USSR. Here I'd like to state that you should perhaps have said that US in general was getting more and more powerful on the international arena. The candidate should also have focused on the contribution of other actors who tried to resolve the conflict, apart from such global powers as Russia, United States, and Great Britain. Another point for debate is the author's statement that the 2017 negotiations collapsed because local authorities demanded the liquidation of the system of guarantees which allowed Turkey to introduce its troops onto the island. Some other recommendations include it should have focused on some Greek publications and publications of Greek Cypriots, provide some profiles of the political leaders, focus on the memories published by ex-political leaders of the island. Should have shown which countries sent their soldiers to be included into the UN peacekeeping force in Cyprus. So all in all, the research is an independent and complete study, which is a major contribution into development of historical science. It is in line with the relevant regulation of Sinzburg State University, and the candidate, Mamedov, can be awarded the degree of the candidate of historical sciences, specialization history of international relations and foreign policy. Thank you for your attention. I have a question to the candidate. Would you like to answer the questions now, or will you answer them after all the reports have been given? If you don't mind, I'd like to answer questions in turns. Professor Akimov, I'd like to thank you for your report, your recommendations, and your criticism. As for your first remark about British special services, for many years they've been safeguarding peace on the island because these forces included ethnic Greeks and Turks. According to Lausanne Agreement, those who lived on the territory until the year 2014, they are subjects of Great Britain. So these forces included both Turkish and Greek population. As for the second remark, for many years Turkey gave responsibility to Great Britain to safeguard peace on the island. That's within the Lausanne Agreement. So Turkey did not provide British troops and the British forces with equipment, weapons, finance, or any other sources. At least I haven't found any statement on that in literature. As for your third critical remark, I accept that. That concerned early 1990s, and then U.S. was trying to act within the UN agenda when it comes to the Cyprus issue. After the bipolar system collapsed, U.S. was gaining more and more powerful profile worldwide. In future, in my studies, I'll focus, of course, on the contribution of other international actors into the resolution of the Cyprus issue. Your question about the Annan plan and possible predictive scenarios of what could have happened if the plan was accepted. Thank you for this interesting idea. I'll focus that in my future studies. I think the scope of my study that I present today is still limited to include this serious issue. As for your critical remark number 5, for Turkish population, the issue of safeguarding security on the island is one of the key issues on the agenda, and they will try to do their best to sustain security on the island. This is what I have found in scholarly works of international scholars. Mostly, scientists are Turkish-centered. I tried to analyze how Greek population is tackled in scientific, in scholarly literature. I also agree that I should have given a brief profile of major political leaders from both Greek and Turkish side. I accept all the remaining remarks, and I'd like to ensure that in future I will keep all of them in mind. Thank you once again for your remarks and your report on my thesis. Are you satisfied with the answers? Yes, I find them absolutely satisfying. Now the floor is given to Professor Ruslan Kostyuk, Doctor of Historical Sciences from St. Petersburg State University. Unresolved conflicts stand high on the international agenda because these issues create threats to regional security and effective economic activity. One of the unresolved issues is the Cyprus issue. The negotiation process, starting from the year 1992 up to 2017, is in the focus of our today's meeting. The period in the focus is almost 1/4 of a century. Some chapters, however, focus on the earlier years of the negotiation process. The aim and objectives of the study look convincing, and the candidate has fully achieved all of them in his research. What makes the research novel is that it's the first Russian comprehensive study that focuses on the given time frame, first off, and secondly, that the candidate focuses on a set of factors that has not been done previously. He focuses on the contribution of all the major global actors into the resolution of the conflict. I'd like to highlight that some of the sources in the bibliography are in Turkish. He analyzed great many sources that focus on this topic, including conventions, UN documents, interviews of diplomats and politicians involved in this issue. This solid work with the bibliography allowed him to effectively achieve the aim and objectives of the study. He is very good at providing arguments for his point of view, and he is good at really revealing the drawbacks of other Russian scholars and points they failed to notice when conducting prior research. I'd like to highlight once again that the candidate keeps giving his own opinion on all the issues he raises, which is very valuable. In the first chapter, he focuses on the reasons and factors which led to the conflict. It's interesting that he highlights some myths that both communities had about each other as one of the reasons for the conflict. The anti-communistic forces won in this battle, and the idea of analysis is also analyzed thoroughly. He focuses on the evolution of the relationship between the two communities until Cyprus became independent. He also analyzes behavioral patterns of Turkey, Great Britain, and other countries. The candidate comes to the conclusion that the Lausanne Agreement was the Zurich-London agreements was the greatest compromise between all the actors involved. Once Cyprus gone independent, this led to new inter-communal talks and conflicts. Analysis became one of the factors that disrupted Cyprus' sovereignty. So, at this time, negotiations were doomed. The uprise of black colonels also negatively contributed into the possible positive resolution of the conflict. Then the candidate writes about the contribution of different parties and countries in the negotiation process. He comes to the conclusion that the establishment of the Cyprus state in 1975 was regarded by Turkish Cypriots as a fight for the federation. Turkish and Greek population had a different view on the idea of zoning. The candidate is careful when he analyzes the approaches of political leaders of Greek, so-called Greek Cyprus and Turkish Cyprus. The candidate is right when he says that from 1992 till later time, the negotiations were largely affected by the willingness of Cyprus to join European Union. And he shows which contradictions existed at the time among the representatives of both communities. The third chapter focuses on the modern period of talks on the Cyprus issue. The Annan Agreement is analyzed thoroughly, and he is right to say that if the then president of the Greek Cyprus was against the Annan plan, whereas the Turkish part was for it. Global powers were supportive of the Annan plan. The Annan plan had a far-reaching consequences for the future of negotiations. The Gezi shows how internal political changes largely affected the negotiations early in the 21st century. During that period when the Greek Cyprus and the Turkish Cyprus were led by leftist politicians that were actually friendly, the prospect of positive resolution of the conflict was possible. However, when in the Turkish Cyprus conservatives won the elections, this resulted in another collapse of negotiations. This happened largely because people were not willing to get rid of the old vistas on the negotiation. Economic factors are no less important. When oil and gas reserves were found along the coast of Cyprus, it changed the course of negotiations again. Cyprus, after all, was negative as regarded the integration of Turkey into the European Union. The 2017 negotiations collapsed because the Turkish Republic wanted the withdrawal of Turkish troops. So the author is right that there is a plethora of factors which impede negotiations. And because of that, it is difficult to achieve effective development of Cyprus as a sovereign, independent state. All the parties involved have to be searching for compromises and mutual concessions. Otherwise, the settlement of the long-lasting conflict is hardly possible. The research is novel, interesting and creative. It's a big contribution into the development of Russian historical science. As for the critical remarks, I have 5 of them. The candidate should have set a task to show the role of European Union in the resolution of the conflict. The candidate discarded such important documents as different minor UN documents. He should also focus on different positions of different political leaders of different time periods on the issue. He could have resorted to the websites of diplomatic missions and embassies which have their missions on the island. As for the civil war of the 1940, the candidate should have given more effective proof to stand for his viewpoint. The third chapter, we remember, focuses on the Annan Plan. However, little attention is given to that in the third chapter. However, it's one of the really important documents as regards the issue. Greek schools on Cyprus celebrate the annual anniversaries of Greek enosis. I believe that it has to do with history and culture. Let's say in the Russian Federation, when the Federal Assembly of Russia made the 4th of November our national holiday, they didn't aim to draw the line between Russia and Poland. This just had to do something with the cultural and historical tradition. The candidate should have analyzed political agendas and programs of political leaders that are currently working in Cyprus. All my critical remarks do not undermine the high value of the research. And I'd like to say that the thesis by Mamedov, his negotiation process on the Cyprus problem, is in line with all the requirements set forth at St. Petersburg University as regards conferring academic degrees, and the candidate can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences, specialization history of international relations and foreign policy. Professor Kostyuk, I'd like to thank you for your report on the thesis and your critical remarks. I'll start with the first critical remark. I'd like to accept that European Union has a crucial role in regulating the conflict. However, my aim was to study the specifics of the negotiation process, starting with the point when the conflict became an open military confrontation. And the negotiations which took place between the two communities living on the island. I focus on the UN activity enough in the third section of the second chapter. Anyway, I accept your critical remark, and in my future studies, I will take that into account and elaborate on it. Critical remark number 2, I accept that as well, and I'll take that into account in my future studies. I focus on the documents and political agendas of political parties in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. There are many political parties, and I really should have focused on their political agendas. The enosis which came along with the civil war affected both communities. As for the Annan Plan and why it collapsed, the Annan Plan has been the focus of many scholars, and it has been thoroughly studied in prior research. So my aim was to show which factors impeded the negotiation process of the 2004-2010 and why Greek Cypriots were against the plan. As for a final critical remark, remark number 5, I disagree with you, distinguished professor. Greek schools celebrate the anniversary of Enosis referendum. this did not negatively impact the negotiation process. No one has a right to conduct events in local schools which focus on the referendum, the so-called analysis, because what we have here is that an attempt to establish an independent sovereign state. And only in the year 2011, Greek Cypriots understood that Turkish Cypriots did not have any interest in these cultural historical issues, and changed the topic for the anniversary. And after that, they started to celebrate the events of the 1950. Now the floor is given to Professor Ramil Valeyev, Doctor of Historical Sciences, from the Kazan Federal University, the Russian Federation. Distinguished colleagues, if you don't mind, I'll be brief and will not focus on the background of the study, the structure of the work, and other technical aspects of the study, because my report is uploaded on the SPB website and you can read it there. I'll only focus on such issues as the relevance of the topic, its novelty, and its contribution into modern historical science. The history of modern international relations focuses on diplomacy, and diplomacy has to often deal with conflict resolution. Among long-lasting global conflicts, the Cyprus conflict stands high. That has been studied by scholars representing different scientific fields. It's really an interdisciplinary issue. The Cyprus negotiations can become a model for similar negotiations between other countries and communities. The topic of the thesis is exceptionally relevant. The interest to this issue as years go by will only be increasing. It gives a research analysis and systematizes major levels of negotiations related to the Cyprus issue, starting with the year 1992 up to the year 2017. The candidate focuses on all the external and internal aspects that fueled the issue or allowed to make effective steps forward to resolve that. Here we see an interplay of interests of many international actors. In recent years, Israel has also joined the process. The peculiarity, what makes the conflict peculiar, is that it took its own course and was not so much driven by the division into the East and West during the years of the Cold War. Scientists share a common ground, saying that the conflict has to be resolved peacefully through negotiations, mutual concessions and compromises. However, recent efforts, as you all are aware, have not been successful enough. UN and its general secretaries has always shown active engagement in this issue. So peacemaking efforts on the island is a fruitful ground for research, for historical studies. As I said before, that's an interdisciplinary interest. And here we have an intersection of geographical, political, economical, cultural, and many other factors. What makes the study even more relevant is that the Mediterranean region is now opening up a new page in its history due to the economic, cultural, and political shifts. So Cyprus is a major geographical and political centers of the world due to the development of transportation routes, logistics, diplomacy, and other aspects. That's why all the materials presented in the dissertation have a certain value. So the conclusions presented after each chapter of the research look convincing and important. As it was said earlier, the purpose of the dissertation research is to show the peculiarities of the dynamics of the negotiating process related to the Cyprus settlement since the transition of the conflict from the latent stage to the form of an open armed confrontation. The study provides answers to many unresolved questions. The candidate has achieved the aim and all the objectives of the study. The candidate is good at providing analytical conclusions and systematizing the data. The study is logical and shows a balance of historical and political aspects of the research. The study is relevant because for the first time in Russian historical science, the focus is on the complex negotiation process on the Cyprus issue. Besides, he shows the important contribution of both communities into the negotiation process. So far, there have been several factors and reasons why such analysis has been impossible or has not been held. So the study has practical and applied value. The study bridges this gap and provides an impartial overview of all the relevant data. All the conclusions are substantiated due to the ample analysis of data and literature. The time frame that we see in the title of the thesis is much wider in scope, and it's only logical because time is a process. So the candidate goes back even to the period of the Ottoman Empire, because the political agenda of those years really affected what we are dealing with now. I believe that the research approach chosen by the candidate is absolutely effective, because if he hadn't focused on earlier time periods, he wouldn't be able to make relevant conclusions about the present. So the study is important because it brings the research on the Cyprus issue to the new level. I agree with my colleagues who say how important it is to focus on a comprehensive approach to different sources of data. I mean, documents of regional level and local level. So here I agree with my colleagues who said that the candidate should have resorted to materials broader in scope. Anyway, the candidate's research is independent and comprehensive study. I'll not speak about the key research findings. I'll just say that they reveal the candidate as an independent and thoughtful scholar. He shows a systematic approach to data analysis. He is good at conducting interdisciplinary study. Now let me speak about those materials which create a certain new vistas for future research, and also my personal recommendations and critical remarks. First off, colleagues have already mentioned that, in my point of view now and in future, it's important for degree seekers to keep in mind that analysis should be done carefully, and analysis should include a wide range of really diverse sources of data and information. A critical review should include all possible documents and sources of data. What's my next question? It's about the voting of Greek population at the referendum. It looks like they stick to the ex-president of Cyprus. I will not mention his personality. Here, the candidate should have more thoroughly analyzed the political agendas of other political leaders from the Greek part of Cyprus and their view of the Annan plan. And here I again stick to my colleagues who said that the candidate should have analyzed political agendas of political leaders who took part in the elections at different points in time. Focusing on the recent 10 years, I believe that the candidate exaggerates the position of Turkish Cypriots on safeguarding their security on the island. Their fears were fueled when Greek Cypriots tried to rehabilitate the idea of enosis. I will not repeat the critical remarks that my colleagues had. Anyway, I will say that the cities by Mamedov topic negotiation process on the Cyprus problem corresponds to all the major requirements set forth in the relevant SPBU regulations, and the candidate can be awarded the degree of the candidate of historical sciences, specialization, history of international relations and foreign policy. Thank you. Distinguished Professor Valeev, I'd like to thank you for your agreement to become the member of the Dissertation Board. Let me remind you that Professor Valeev has come from Kazan to join us today. Another thank you is for the submitted report and the critical remarks. I accept your critical remark number 1, and let me assure you that in my future research efforts, I'll be more attentive to critical reviews. As for your second critical remark, today, Zurich-London agreements don't look ideal. However, at that point in time, when they were signed by Great Britain, Turkey and Greece, and that was the foundation of the Cyprus constitution, it was a prerequisite for the Greek constitution and for the Professor Almas, I'm sorry we cannot see your face in the camera.
Oh,
yes,
sure, I was taking
yes, thank you.
Thank
you. Yes, now we can see you. Thank you.
Okay,
Sorry for that.
Good. No problem.
As for critical remark number 3, I accept that totally. In my study, I evaluated the position of Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots as regards the Annan Plan. We analyzed the memoirs and diaries of the then President Vasilio, and there we could find what he thought about the Annan Plan. However, we also had in focus the opinions of other political leaders among Cypriot Greeks. That's in brief given in my dissertation. In my previous comments to other reports on the thesis, as regards the Annan Plan, the plan was not thoroughly described in my dissertation because it has been the focus of other scientists earlier. In conclusion, as regards your final critical remark about safeguarding security, security is still a major issue on the island, and Turkish Cypriots are not sure that once Turkish troops are withdrawn from the northern part of Cyprus, international community will guarantee security to the minority population of the island. Currently, there are two major issues which impede negotiations. Issue number 1 is the security issue, and issue number 2 is the issue of land and ownership of property. I have been to Cyprus, to both parts of it. Professor Valeev is speaking. And I really agree that Turkish population is really concerned about its security. Now the floor is given to Professor Suhnas Yilmaz, Doctor of Political, PhD in Political Science. You're welcome with your report.
Honorable members of the jury, dear candidate, it's a great pleasure to be a member of this very distinguished jury. Overall, I believe this is a very well-balanced, comprehensive study with important novel contributions especially due to the fact that it's one of the first of its kind written in Russian language as well. The dissertation overall analyzes the complex dynamics of the negotiation process related to the Cyprus problem, focusing on the 1992-2017 period. The historical background starts with the transformation of the conflict from its latent state to an armed confrontation. The study then covers the numerous negotiation attempts, including the 2017 negotiations under UN auspices. The dissertation examines mainly the historical as well as the political background of the conflict in Cyprus by highlighting the differences in the interests of the Greek and Turkish communities of Cyprus. It also explores the role and impact of international organizations, particularly the UN, and critical regional and global players during the negotiation process. So after this brief overview, I want to go on to my assessment, highlighting both the strengths of the dissertation as well as some critical remarks which I labeled as areas for improvement. And I will be doing that under each section or after each section. First of all, the topic of dissertation research is highly relevant, as the energy politics in the Mediterranean has once again brought the Cyprus issue into the limelight. The dissertation topic is very timely and relevant. Moreover, it is also relevant for providing a better understanding of complex negotiation processes in general. The theoretical and methodological basis of the research are works of leading authors, as well as primary documents of international organizations. The key arguments of the dissertation research is substantiated by empirical data, and conclusions soundly stem from the candidate's research. While in need of some editing for English, overall the study is written in good English, effectively utilizing suitable academic terminology, at least the English part. The relevant literature was used throughout the dissertation. The dissertation has a clear contribution and interesting results, and addresses a timely and important issue. While I have no major criticisms regarding the overall quality of the work, in my specific areas of discussion, I point out to some issues which could be addressed to improve the dissertation. Now, I will go section by section. So, as for the introduction provides a good overview and motivation of the topic. In the introduction, relevance of the research topic, the goal, and objectives of the dissertation research are explained. The introduction includes the theoretical and methodological foundations of the study. There is also a review of the relevant literature. As for my critical remarks or points for improvement, first, I believe in this section, the research question and the relevant subset of questions need to be laid out and explained much more clearly at the outset. So there has to be a more clear stating of the research question and subset of questions. And the methodological basis part needs more elaboration and emphasis, like the relevant methodologies, sources you have used, and a more expansion of the sources could be possible, could be highlighted in this section. Moving on to the main body, Chapter 1 lays out the historical and political background of the Cyprus conflict, with a specific emphasis on the period from the struggle for independence to the outbreak of conflict in 1974. Chapter 2 focuses on the 1974-2004 period by examining the roles of key international actors and organizations, especially UN, in the negotiation process as well. In this context, the study brings the factors hindering the negotiation process in the 1992-2004 period into the limelight. Chapter 3 starts out with an examination of the reasons for failure of the Annan Plan through the diverging prism of political and economic interests of the Greek and Turkish Cypriot communities of the island. The study also briefly touches upon the domestic aspect as well by studying the impact of negotiation process on the transformation of the political elites of the parties to the Cyprus conflict in 2005-2010 period. Then it continues with an assessment of the new initiatives and steps taken by international organizations and relevant regional and global actors to resolve the Cyprus problem in 2011-2017 period. As for my critical review, I raised 3 points which could have been addressed better. The first one, while the study is good in description of events, the analytical part regarding the role of key organizations and especially critical regional and global players need to be emphasized and highlighted more. Second, in addressing this complex issue, utilizing levels of analysis in world politics, and it has kind of come up in different reviews during today's discussion. For instance, looking overall to the role of leadership, role of key figures, relations, societal factors, governmental factors, systematic international factors, thus utilizing a levels of analysis framework could have been more systematic and useful in terms of a theoretical structure. And finally, I thought domestic and external linkages needed more elaboration and more analysis. And once again, as voiced earlier, a more comprehensive analysis of the agendas of different political leaders from different communities, both Turkish and Greek Cypriot communities, could be integrated in relation to the international dimension, highlighting domestic and international linkages. Finally, moving on to the conclusions. The conclusions summarize the historical trajectory and developments. As for my areas of improvement and critical review, key findings and especially novel contributions need to be emphasized. You have effectively done that during your presentation today, so that could be highlighted more in the conclusion. And I also mentioned that this part has to be slightly extended and improved. The bibliography is quite comprehensive. Overall, the dissertation by Mamedov, Mamed, Koshkar-ogly is a completed and independently executed scientific research. It presents new ideas and debates and is of interest for both scholars and policymakers. The dissertation research carried by him and presented for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in Historical Sciences meets the qualification requirements for candidate dissertations on specialty, history of international relations and foreign policy. Thank you.
Спасибо большое.
Professor Suhnas Ilmaz, first off, I'd like to thank you for your willingness to join the dissertation board and for your high opinion of my research. I'd like to also thank you for your critical remarks. Now, I'd like to answer your questions and provide my answers to your critical remarks. Some of the critical remarks you have arise due to the differences that we have as it comes to the when it comes to the demands that we have in Russia and in your country to the research works of such kind. Unfortunately, we cannot change the text of the dissertation after it's already uploaded on the website and published. So
these are for future research then. This is as it is. So these are comments for the future.
Thank you. Со своей стороны мы учтем все замечания, высказанные.
I assure you that all these critical remarks I will take into account in my future research. And once again, I'd like to thank you one more time for your contribution. Do you find the answers satisfying?
Yes, and some of them, some of the issues that I raised, especially about political leaders, their work, better integration of international issues, it has come up in earlier questions and the candidate has responded to that. So that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Спасибо. Позвольте теперь мне огласить отзыв.
Now I would like to take the floor. I'm the chair of the Dissertation Board. The Cyprus issue is an interesting question, and it has been with us for many years. Cyprus has an important geographical and political position because it's located at the intersection of interests of many international actors. Turkey, Greece, Russia, Great Britain, China, and the USA. The issue has not been resolved, and it impedes the economic development of the region as well as its political development. It is the first study in Russia that focuses at large on the history of the negotiation process and focuses on the set of factors as well as the personal views of Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots on the issue. The aim of the study was to reveal the peculiarities of the dynamics of the negotiation process related to the Cyprus settlement since the transition of the conflict from the latent stage to the form of an open armed confrontation until the last attempt to resolve the confrontation under the UN auspices in 2017. This time frame allowed the candidate to unveil the specific features of the negotiation factors and analyze the factors which impede this process. This time frame is well substantiated for, and I don't have any reservations against that. The bibliography is ample. There are 134 sources, which include UN documents, interviews and narrative sources by the leaders of the Northern Cyprus and the Southern Cyprus. The principle that lies in the foundation of the research is the historical method. The candidate should have specified what kind of methodology he used in each part of the research. The structure is balanced, it's logical, and in line with the research objectives. The first chapter focuses on the prerequisite of the conflict. The candidate analyzes political environment as the basis of the conflict. The Cold War made its contribution to worsen the situation on the island. So the US and the USSR were not able to balance their view on the Cyprus problem because of the Cold War. The second chapter focuses on a range of agreements concerning the issue. The third chapter is the most successful, as I see that, because it focuses on the lenses on the negotiation process. The candidate has revealed the factors which impede the resolution of the conflict in the year 2004-2005. I may agree with the conclusion of the author that the the Annan Plan offered new approaches to resolve the conflict. The candidate is right to say that starting with the year 2011, the major factor affecting the negotiation process is the economic factor. He comes to the conclusion that reanimation and rehabilitation of the enosis idea shows that Greek Cypriots are not ready to live in the single unified Cyprus, but want to become part of Greece. The study is null, and that's beyond doubt, because that focuses on the historical, ideological, political, and other factors, which drew the conflict from its latent stage into a military confrontation. The study is novel, original, and relevant. Yet, I'd like to focus on some debatable issues. I have 5 of them. Number 1, the candidate is right to say that negotiations are always affected by external and internal factors. There are many actors involved in the process, international organizations as well as global leaders. The candidate should have focused on the documents of the European Union Parliament as well. Talking about political and economic factors, we should not overlook the confessional or religious factor, because that also affects the situation. I wonder also how the Turkish and Greek contradiction affected the negotiation process. As the candidate says, the economic factor is the major factor, has been the major factor affecting the negotiation process recently. How could Russia contribute to the resolution of the issue? And finally, the candidate analyzed ample bibliography. However, the study would benefit if the candidate had focused on the memoirs of political leaders and studies of scientists in Turkish studies and Oriental studies. All in all, the research is in line with major requirements set forth in the relevant legislation on conferring degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and the candidate Mamedov can be awarded the academic degree, specialization, History of International Relations and Foreign Policy. Item 11 of the relevant order has not been violated. Thank you. Distinguished Chair, thank you for your report and the critical remarks. I start with the critical remark number 1 about the European Union. Truth be told, recently the activity of European Union and its Parliament has not been that obvious in this region. The Cyprus conflict before and now is mostly on the agenda of the United Nations. Still, I agree with you, and I should have also included the UN documents. As for the religious and confessional aspect, I'm well aware that in your studies you focus a lot on religious. I remember your lectures, since I remember lectures that you read when I was on the bachelor program. I focused on religious aspect as well. So on the slide you see Archbishop Macarius III, and one of the papers I published was dedicated to the antagonistic relations between Greek and Turkish Church. President Macarius Archbishop Makarios, head of Greek Church, back in the year 2015, established the referendum on enosis. The basic idea of that is the united Greece based on the same religion and the same views on many aspects. Talking about Turkish and Greek contradictions, it's your third critical remark. I should say that they will always affect the negotiation process. However, to a larger extent, they have more impact on not the essence and Ankara relations, but rather the relations between the two political leaders of the island. So the major impediment on achieving progress in negotiations is the pattern of behavior that Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots stick to. They are not willing to find compromises. They cannot find a common ground when it comes to economical interest. They can't find a common ground to the possible integration with the European Union. What's typical for the northern part and what they regard as poverty for the southern part is regarded as a more or less prosperous lifestyle. So economical issues stand high as well. The city of Varosha, that's the northern part of Cyprus, before recently had been a more developed city. However, both parts of the island in recent time have been welcoming investment from European Union and other stakeholders. So in near future, we will see publications that will focus on these religious and economic aspects. As regards your final critical remark, here the fault is mine, and I'll take that into account in my future work and include the sources of scholars in Turkish studies and scholars in Oriental studies on these issues. Thank you. We proceed with our agenda. Now the floor is given to the thesis supervisor, Professor Niyazi Niyazov. Distinguished members of the Dissertation Board, it's a pleasure to welcome all of you. I'd like to thank you for your contribution, and my special thank you goes to Professor Sukhnas Ayilmaz.
Thank you.
I'd like to say a few words about Mamedov. He was the one who introduced the topic and the time frame. Our original idea was to limit the time frame to the Annan Plan. However, he was insistent, and finally we extended the time frame to include the year 2017. He really has a critical and analytical mind. He's curious. Sometimes he would disagree with me because my views very often were different, but I have to admit that sometimes I had to accept the viewpoint because he unveiled very interesting data and material. So once again, I'd like to thank all of you and to vote for conferring the academic degree of the candidate of historical science to Mamedov. So now we have 5 minutes to discuss the issue on granting or not granting the academic degree. I would like the non-board members to leave the room. We are moving forward with our agenda. I would like the technical staff to switch on the broadcast. Now these are the decisive moments of our today's session. I put to the vote the issue of conferring the academic degree. Let me remind you that in conformity with item 23 of the relevant order, the decision of the Dissertation Board on conferring the academic degree is positive, provided it has received 50% of the votes from no fewer than 3 members of the Dissertation Board. Professor Akimov, what is your opinion? I'm voting for. Member of the Dissertation Board, Professor Kostyuk, I'm voting for. Member of the Dissertation Board, Professor Valeev, I'm voting for. Remotely, we have Professor Sukhnas Elmas. What is your opinion? Are you voting for or against?
I'm voting for.
Thank you. Me, Professor Zelenova, Chair of the Dissertation Board, voting for. Dear colleagues and attendees, 5 out of 5 members of the Dissertation Board have voted for. There is no one who has voted against, and there is no one who has abstained from voting. So our decision is positive, and we can confer the academic degree of the candidate of historical sciences to Mamedov. History, the specialization is history of international relations and foreign policy. Now I'd like to give the floor to Mamedov for his closing speech. Distinguished Chair of the Dissertation Board, distinguished members of the Dissertation Board, first off, I would like to extend my appreciation for the opportunity to talk here today and for the positive decision you have taken. I'm really grateful to my city's supervisor, Professor Niyazov, I'm really thankful and grateful for his patience and for his useful advice. If it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't be standing here today. I'd like to wish good health to all those who have been with us today and watching the broadcast. Thank you. Now we're closing the session of the Dissertation Board. Thanks everyone for joining us today. The broadcast is off. We would like to thank Professor Sukhnas Elmas for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and congratulations.